We are a group of friends, bound by our appreciation for liberty and good podcasting. Free-minded thinkers from all walks of life, our values come together with one accord to discuss the common culture and news of the day, along with whatever random crap is going on in our lives. Welcome to the Union of the Unknowns.
Welcome to the Union of the Unknowns. This is another Wag Your Chin for Better Health episode, and I will be your host today, Ashley, Think, Change, Repeat, and with me I have my fellow unknown, Mr. Terry Canary. Hello, Terry. How are you doing?
Hello, Ashley. I'm very well, thank you. Good to be here.
Wonderful. Very happy to have you here, and thank you all for tuning in. So, in today's episode, we are kind of introducing a series that we're going to be doing on pain, and that's going to be covering a lot of broad topics under that umbrella. So, we want to talk about advocating for yourself if you have pain, to try to find the information that you need, and we want to talk about describing your pain that you may be feeling and for you to be able to have a better understanding of what you're experiencing and being able to relay that to the health professionals or whoever you're working with and dealing with. And then we want to educate on some modalities that you could potentially pursue that are going to be non-pharmaceutical based and largely outside of having to have health insurance and things like that. And then we want to talk about in this series, it may cover other modalities of treatment, such as red light therapy or ways for you to advocate for yourself when you're getting body work, things like that, what you need to be aware of. And as well as in cases where you may actually need a pharmaceutical or where you may need an opioid, and what are some myths and misunderstandings around that situation. So if you know anything about me, you know that I'm not an advocate for pharmaceuticals. However, I want to make sure that we are discussing the topic in a way that covers all of the issues. And the other thing that I wanted to say and reiterate is that this is not medical advice. All of this is trying to discuss some things that may help you if you're in chronic pain or dealing with pain issues, on how to identify that and then how to become aware of some things that may help you, and some of this information may surprise you. So that's all we want to do, is just try to bring a conversation around this subject and to help people be able to advocate for themselves and to maybe hear about some options that you may not be aware of, and to maybe think about things a little bit outside of the box. And we may also get into some causes of pain later in the series, as far as maybe from some autoimmune issues and things like that. We're going to have a free form and kind of see where this goes, but we just wanted to bring this to you and present to you some information that is not necessarily out there, even in the natural health sphere. It's not something that's discussed a little bit, but it is something that matters to me and something that I have a lot of experience with. So I wanted to bring it to you. So before we get into everything, Terry, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that sounds good. I mean, just to sort of make it more obvious, I think we all know that chronic pain is a huge problem in the Western world now. Back pain is one example. I've got a stat here from a Midwestern doctor, who's a doctor I follow on Substack, that spinal pain affects millions, and that's despite over $134 billion being spent annually on it in the USA alone. So, and it's obviously, for the people who suffer from it, it's a very debilitating issue, and it's one reason behind the fentanyl addiction crisis, of course, which we may touch on later on. So, yeah, big problem. Over to you.
Absolutely. And there's a lot to be said about neck and back pain, which are very common issues that people do have a lot of complaints about. And one of the things that I want to discuss are some of the causes, because sometimes it's obvious and sometimes it's not. So, as we said, we're going to kind of see where this conversation goes. But one of the things that I wanted to start out with is that I want to give people my personal story of dealing with physical pain that I had a very difficult time getting treated with, and figuring out what was the cause or what is the best way to approach and or treat this. And the reason that I'm telling you this, I don't really like to get into a lot of personal stuff in our show. However, I find it to be very important because this was one of the things that has really informed my opinion, not only in the health, like just advocating or just being a person in the United States who's dealing with whatever health system, healthcare that we have, but also from uh, making me be very suspicious of that, realizing that you have to advocate for yourself, realizing what you are not told in this particular situation, and realizing what actually ended up helping me. So I so that's where I wanted to start. So many, many years ago, and I was working young professional, and I was having a lot of neck and shoulder pain, like constantly, and some low back pain, but that was not necessarily as bothersome as my neck and shoulder pain was, and it was a pretty constant thing. So eventually, I um, decided to try to do something about it. So I went to a chiropractor, and I ended up getting some adjustments, and she also did acupuncture and things like that. Well, that did not end up helping me at all. Okay, so she was whatever adjustment she was doing and whatever acupuncture, it was not helpful for me during that time. Then fast forward a couple years later, it's continuing to still bother me. Nothing really has ever changed. It ebbs and flows, like it's not always as bad, but sometimes it was very, very bothersome, especially when you're trying to work a full-time job and you're trying to be active and live your life, and then you're constantly having this neck and shoulder pain, and it doesn't necessarily really make sense. So I had gone to a massage therapist. So I was spending hundreds of dollars going to a massage therapist and getting deep tissue work. I was getting hot stone massage as well, which actually did feel very comforting and helpful to me at the time. However, I really was not having much luck at addressing the you know, the pretty consistent pain that I was dealing with. And so I was like, okay, well, I guess I need to try to see a doctor or something like that. So then eventually I went to, whatever regular doctor and was referred to, might have been a spinal surgeon or something, neurosurgeon, something to that effect. And they did, an x-rays, and they did an MRI or CT scan or something. I mean, this is many years ago. I don't remember what the imaging was. And then they did a nerve conduction study. And then, of course, in that time, I was prescribed muscle relaxers, and I nothing helped me. Nothing helped. The muscle relaxer made me tired, made me sleepy, but it never addressed the actual issue that I was dealing with. So nothing that any of those people to that point over the span of many years had been able to help me. So eventually I started going to another chiropractor. Um, and or actually the chiropractor was a different one, but it was in conjunction with my massage therapist. So I'm getting very consistent massage therapy work, a very consistent chiropractic adjustment. Then I saw the doctors. Nothing made a difference. Okay. So basically, and this is over, as I said, many years. So then I'm in massage school, and I had a what would be referred to as a flare up. So like I said, it wasn't always bothering me, but sometimes it did, and sometimes it was literally debilitating. Like I couldn't move. I felt like I couldn't move my head, and it was very painful. And it's you don't understand why. And it's like nothing really seems to help. And like eventually it'll go away, maybe. But anyway, so I'm in massage school, and I had a flare up, so it was my entire like right shoulder and right neck that was bothering me. And I asked my teacher if he would work on me. And so he started working on my because okay, so this is something to look out for later in this conversation, but the pain was felt between my shoulder blades, which if you're into anatomy and like basic human anatomy, then that's going to be in your middle trap region or in the rhomboids, rhomboid major and rhomboid minor, and it's between the your shoulder blade and your spine, and that's where a lot of people feel a lot of pain. And so that was one of the places. But the other odd thing about it was that it did hurt there, but it also felt like it was up in my neck. And I couldn't necessarily identify exactly where it hurt because it was regional, which did not really make sense to me until I started going to massage school and putting some of this together. So I asked him if he would work on me, and he started working on between my shoulder blade and my spine, and he put an enormous amount of pressure, and I just did not feel relief. It just felt like it was such deep pain in my shoulder. And he said, "Okay, this is not going to help you then. So we need to work on a different part." So what he ended up doing was actually accessing part of my rotator cuff, which is known as the subscapularis. So there's four muscles that make up your rotator cuff, which is like the infraspinatus, supraspinatus, subscapularis, and one of the teres, either teres major, teres minor. Either way, it's comprised of four muscles all over, okay? And the subscapularis is actually facing, it's like on the inside of your scapula. And so it's a little bit difficult to access, but you actually can access it through like on the outside of your it's like in that armpit axillary area that is kind of you can access the front of the shoulder blade. So that was what he ended up doing, and I ended up finally getting relief for my issue for the first time in I couldn't even tell you how many years. The first person that
Wow.
was able to was
Wow.
not only a massage therapist, but a massage therapist who understood that type of issue. Because I had gone to massage therapists before and it didn't help. And I had
Yeah.
gone to therapists before and it didn't help. So it was somebody who understood. So that was my pain journey of trying to address an issue that really shouldn't have been that hard. And it took me years, but I finally found out what it was, at least in that instance, which was likely a trigger point or, bound up muscle tissue that was on the front of my rotator cuff. And it was referring all the way up into my neck and shoulder.
Very interesting. That's I didn't know that story, but so I have a question for you. Do you and I suppose the general principle is that a bit of anatomical knowledge can go a long way in treating pain because sometimes I know that when you get an injury, muscles can go into spasm. So the pain, the sort of really tender spot you're feeling might not actually be the source of the injury. So when I was going to ask you, do you know what, whether this was sourced from a particular injury? Because I know you were a sporting person when you were younger. You were a bit of a demon soccer player, I seem to remember. So, but my understanding of rotator cuff is it's often a throw-in injury, right? A lot of baseball pitchers and cricketers get it. So, do you know where that original problem came from?
That's a really good question, and I don't know. And that's one of the things though, I think it's a very important question to bring up because I think that's one of the things is that we sometimes have to be okay with not knowing what the actual source of the potential injury or the imbalance in the body came from. So I know that when I was playing sports and things like that, I never felt like I had anything that was really bothering me. I certainly got knocked around and ran into people on the soccer field. And could that have played a part? Definitely. Um, But I also think that you can be totally fine, and sometimes you just wake up and you're in pain. So I think that one of the things that I want to talk to people about is what I refer to as our kinetic chain. So, basically within the body, everything is connected. And if you want to look at it as lines or whatever makes sense to you, or even like puppet on a string, right? Like the song, the head bone's connected to the neck bone. It is actually kind of like that.
Hmm.
So there is a program known as Anatomy Trains, and the guy who ended up founding that essentially identified lines within the body that are referred to as, for example, superficial front line, deep front line, superficial back line, deep back line, spiral line, things like that. So these associations that would be made, for example, in a spiral line, could actually connect your left shoulder to your right hip. Okay. And so all that to say, I'm not trying to overcomplicate it, but I'm just trying to say that we have these everything that is connected in the body that may not be very obvious to us, especially if we haven't been in that world hearing this kind of information. And so I think that it it could be a who knows, right? Like, for example, a lot of times if somebody has knee surgery, then and let's take out the surgery equation at all. If you needed it, if you didn't need it, they told you it was cartilage, it was bone on bone. Yeah, they always say that. But I'm just saying, like, what you have is something that affected your gait, right? So when you're walking, then that is changing the way that you walk when you're trying to recover and even after, because you had surgery done on a piece of the body that connects the other part of the body. So whenever we have a certain gait and that is changed, and especially if they put you in a boot or something like that, then you're like walking to try to accommodate, then that's going to have consequences down the line. I mean, it's like a chain in for all intents and purposes. So having maybe an issue in the left foot could potentially cause a problem for you in your right hip, things like that. So I'm just saying that it's not always very obvious what is the actual cause or the source of our pain. Sometimes it's obvious, like, oh, I was moving a couch by myself and I shouldn't have been doing that, which I have done before. And I did pay for it after with problems with my rotator cuff. But
Hmm.
sometimes it's not super obvious. And there's so many factors that we need to take into consideration that could be um, affecting how we feel. So, for an example, in musculature, it is how we walk, which is known as our gait, is how we sleep. Are you a side sleeper, a back sleeper, a stomach sleeper, things like that? It is going to be do you sit on your wallet? Are you driving a big rig that's a straight drive, right? And you're having to deal with a very challenging clutch, like things like this, or like what Terry's saying, if you are an athlete or a runner or whatever that may be, and you're doing certain repetitive activities, then things like this need to be factored into when you're looking at the source of pain. Do you work on a concrete floor all day for 12 hours a day? Things like this. And I know that's a lot of information, but it's important for people to start, I think, to start thinking about these things and taking them into consideration, because if you are in pain and you decide to pursue something outside of the medical industrial complex or the pharmaceutical complex as a way to address that, then I really want to start educating you on some things that could be factors, and that will help you figure out who you can work with and who understands what you have going on, and it will help you be a better advocate for yourself and improve your chances of better results, in my opinion and from my experience. Do you have anything to add there, Terry?
I do, because I wanted to touch on your what you're saying about gates, because I was a keen runner for many years. I still run a bit now, but I'm not really able to do as much as I used to. I used to run a lot of races, and something that happened to me when I was 20, before I got into running, was that I tore the ligament in my left ankle very badly, and it had to be in plaster, and it never. I never really got proper rehabilitation work done on it, so it's still very weak. And subsequent to that, when I was doing a bit more running many years later, I got what's called plantar fasciitis. You'll probably know about this. In my right foot, the plantar fascia is a sort of thick band of tissue that runs underneath your foot. And I think what was happening was that because my left ankle was very sort of loose and wobbly, my gait was a bit uneven. So most of the flexing I was doing when I was running was taking my right foot was taking all that stress, and that's why. So whenever I get this problem, and I've got it a bit again now, it's always happening on the right side, and I think it's because my left ankle is basically, not very good now. So yeah, that was and another thing I wanted to touch on was that Fiona and I used to go to a really good massage therapist in the UK, and she had these kind of magical powers. From what you were saying about connections in the body, she'd be working on one part of your body, but you would be able to detect something that was wrong in another part of your body. And once I can't remember if she was working on a leg or something, and she said, "Oh, it looks like you've got something funny with your right arm. Looks like you had an injury in the past." And I sort of went, "No, I don't think so." And then I said, "Oh yeah, it was when I was about 12. I fell out of a tree and broke my arm on that side. In fact, I broke it twice on 2 different occasions." I don't want to give you the impression I'm accident prone or anything, but and she was very into, and she was interested in reflexology as well, which is another way that this idea that different parts of the body are connected. So yeah. Oh, back to you.
Very good. Yes, and I do want to get into some of the modalities that are available out there to you, and that would all be under the umbrella of what would be known as body work or massage therapy. And there's a lot of different areas of treatment under that umbrella. Before we get there, though, and I think we've laid the groundwork, right, of dealing with a chronic pain issue. And the message that I really want to convey is that if you happen to be interested in staying outside of the medical, industrial, and pharmaceutical complex, that even if you've been dealing with chronic pain for many years, I still believe that there's hope for you in order to find ways to get some relief. Now, I do think that there are complicating factors. If somebody has had surgery, particularly back or neck surgery, then I think that complicates things a lot versus somebody who has never been under the knife for these types of issues. Or in Terry's situation, Terry's saying that he had a very bad ligament tear. Things like that are going to be a little more difficult to treat versus if we're just dealing with musculature or something that's related to that, or like an acute injury, like you fall and you hurt yourself, but nothing is like severely damaged, but we just need to get you recovered, right? So I just want people to understand that there's certainly a lot of considerations at play, but I still believe that even if you have had surgery or something like that, that you can have benefit and improved health and quality of life by learning some of this stuff and advocating for yourself. So that's the main thing. I just wanted to lay the groundwork for that. The other thing that I wanted to say is that there are a lot of causes of pain that may sound very obvious, but what I'm leading up to is that I want people to become better at being able to describe your pain. And that is for 2 reasons. So, the first thing is that if you're able to describe your pain, I think that you are more effective at advocating for yourself. So, you'll remember from my story that I had gone to a massage therapist, that even though I was getting deep tissue work, it was not necessarily what I needed. And it wasn't terrible work or anything like that. He just did not hit on what I was experiencing as the problem. Okay. But if we can start becoming aware of what pain we're experiencing and being able to describe that and checking in with ourselves, then that helps us to be able to advocate for ourselves better. It helps us to be able to notice when we are improving. And this is going to also tie in with an awareness of what is going on with you. And so, starting to what I refer to as cultivating awareness of you. When you drive, how do you drive? How are you sitting? You don't even have to make any changes or anything like that, but it's starting to cultivate an awareness of how you do things with your movement throughout your day. If you're sitting on the couch in the evening, how do you sit? Do you have like low back support? Do you cross one leg over the other leg all the time? Do you sit like with your knees up, crunched to one side and you're on the other side? Like all of these things, starting to pay attention to what does your movement look like in your day-to-day activity. And all of this is so that you can advocate for yourself better and you can be more in tune with what you're actually experiencing. And then again, I want to reiterate that there's a lot of different causes from pain. And yes, sometimes it is muscular. Even if you go to a doctor and they tell you that it's bone on bone, or they tell you that you need, who knows, they tell you that you have a pinched nerve, or they tell you that you have a bulging disc or something like that. I would just be very aware, excuse me, of what they're telling you, and that the information that they are providing you is often going to be very limited, because that is where their treatment plan, that's what it is. The treatment plan often goes like this. You go in, you tell them that you're having some kind of a pain. They're going to ask you what kind of pain it is. Then they may prescribe you muscle relaxers or something like that. That's not going to, in 99% of the time, at least in my anecdotal experience, it's not going to help you. It may help you relax, but it's not going to help address the actual muscle pain. And then you're going to go back, and then they're going to say, or you're going to tell them, okay, the muscle pain isn't better. And they're like, okay, well, we need to do an x-ray. And then they're going to do an x-ray and they're not going to find anything most of the time. Or they, like I was saying, they might find something and say, well, like, you know, we have a bulging disc or whatever it is, but they're not going to really know. And they're say, well, and really x-rays are not great for identifying soft tissue anyway. So we need to refer you to a specialist. Then you'll get referred to a specialist, and then they're going to say that they need to do things like a CT or an MRI and maybe more x-rays, and then maybe the nerve conduction study, and they're just going to put you through all these expensive tests, and it's going to take however long, however much of your time, your day, your life to get this stuff done. And then even then, they might not find anything. And so they'll say, well, we didn't really find anything. I don't know. You know, it's not enough to do surgery. Or if they happen to find something that they are taught is bad enough for surgery, then they'll take you under the knife when that may not be necessary. That is the main thing that I want to convey, is if they tell you that you must have surgery, you have other options to look into, to at the very least see if it will be helpful for you before you go the surgical route. Because in some of these places, in the neck and the back, if they make a mistake, so often people don't, not only do they not feel better, sometimes they feel worse after having neck and back surgery. And whatever they're cutting, I'm saying, like, it makes it a lot more challenging to recover from. So please just keep that in mind. That is the most important thing that I want to convey. They have a system in the medical industry, and they're always going to go this way. They're almost always going to tell you these things. And then if it's not bad enough for them to do surgery, they're going to suggest that they do corticosteroid injections to you, and that they can do that to you every 3 months. What they don't do is educate you on the potential side effects of having a steroid injected into the area that they are saying is causing the pain. So sometimes in really severe cases, a steroid can actually dissolve or degrade the connective tissue and the bone in the area that it is injected into. They don't tell you that, but that is a real, it has happened to real people. Okay. And then the other thing, oftentimes that also is not effective at addressing the cause of your pain. And in all of this, and I apologize. I feel like I'm on a soapbox here. That's not what I mean. I just want people to know that you have options, but you have to be aware and you have to be your own advocate, because they'll get you into the meat grinder if you don't. So the other thing that I wanted to make sure that I tell people is that in the types of pain that we're talking about, and I had mentioned earlier that we may get into like an autoimmune kind of thing, right? There's a million different things that could be causing pain. You can have pain from, yes, an autoimmune disorder. You can have pain from a chronic illness, from an injury many years ago. Sometimes, as Stephen King writes in his books, and I don't think he's the original to say this, sometimes a smoke is just a smoke. Sometimes it's just a muscle problem. But in all of that entire description of you going through the medical system, what I didn't mention is that they don't talk about your musculature ever. And that is a huge problem, because so often it is musculature. Now, I'm not saying that a lot of work doesn't need to be done in order to identify that, or maybe that we're dealing with like tendons and ligaments and connective tissue and gait analysis and, very tight bound up fascia and all these things. Like that's real, but they don't talk to you about that. Never. They act like your muscles don't exist. And that is even in the case of many chiropractors. Now, some of them will tell you to get a massage, but they don't tell you how to advocate for yourself. They don't recommend massage therapists that fully have an understanding of anatomy or trigger points or the kinetic chain or anything like that. So that's what this episode is, and this entire series is about, is educating you on options, on advocating for yourself, and describing what you're going through, and understanding that pain is coming from in a lot of different places in many cases. So the last thing before I hand it over to Terry that I wanted to say is that in the case of causes of pain, that yes, it can be our day-to-day lifestyle, injury, muscle pain, all of that. Yes, it can be autoimmune or illness, or some, God forbid, something way more serious that's the source of your pain, all of that. So and the other thing that I want to say is that oftentimes trauma can also cause pain. So it may even manifest itself in muscle pain or stomach pain or something like that, but it is actually, and there's a book out there, there's a couple books on this subject, but it's called The Body Keeps the Score. So when people go through very traumatic events, depending on the severity and exactly what that event was, then it can actually manifest as being held as pain in the body. So please don't think that I'm saying that everything is just going to be fixed as long as you find the right massage therapist. That's not what I'm saying at all. I just want to provide information to how the system can traditionally go in this particular circumstance. But if we're dealing with something else, like a very serious debilitating disease, such as cancer or an autoimmune disorder or severe trauma, then that's a totally different ballgame. And not that we're not going to get into that, but just that that's not what I'm referring to here. Terry?
Well, very interesting points. Yeah, you're quite right in that we've noticed this in the medical profession in general, that specialists in one field will just want to do that to treat you. So you were talking about chiropractors, and they'll just want to do an adjustment to try and fix you, even if that's not really the underlying problem. So they're prone to the same problems that some mainstream medics will have in that sense. You probably know that I quite like evolutionary biology, and there's an idea amongst some of them that because we've adapted recently, talk about back and neck pain, we've adapted recently to walking upright, and we're not quite, fully adapted to it yet. And that causes us back problems. Personally, I think if we were living like hunter-gatherers, we wouldn't really have a lot of chronic pain from sort of walking about. We might, we obviously suffer the odd traumatic injury from falling out of a tree or getting chased by a bear, which is probably what our colleague Justin is going through at the moment on his camping trip. But other than that, I think it's probably quite a healthy way to live your life. And I think a lot of problems with backs, and you might have a comment on this, and backs and necks, is from our modern lifestyle of sitting at a desk. And I most of my life, my working life, I was at a desk job because I was a computer programmer, mathematician type person, doing a lot of work on computers. And I used to get a lot of problems with my back, particularly down at my sacroiliac joint on my right hand side, which is like the joint between your hip and your back. And during the end of my career, I experimented with like a stand-up desk where I was standing and working. And it wasn't particularly good for my feet, so it made my plantar fasciitis a bit worse. But my back felt a lot better, and I think it was helping my sort of core strength because I was supporting myself all day rather than just slumped in a chair. So I don't know if you've got a comment on that. I think modern lifestyle has a lot to do with some of the chronic pain issues we get, particularly from backs and necks. Over to you.
I absolutely think that that's a contributing factor. Things that I talked about before, just that we do in our day-to-day life that I really think have a huge impact on that. So, number one, and I'm not saying that I'm immune to this, right? Or immune from this, but sitting, a lot of sitting, just like what you said, sitting at a desk for many hours a day. People used to be moving a lot more than is like our lifestyle kind of allows for in today's day and time. We do a lot more sitting. So I absolutely think that a lot of sitting is a very big factor to low back pain and all the way up. And that's the other thing, like we talked about, that I truly believe in an anatomy trains approach, that everything is connected and working together. And so the other factors that I strongly believe are problematic are going to be stress. They don't say the weight of the world on your shoulders for nothing. So certainly that has an impact on us, and living in a lifestyle that is, and we know that this world has been cultivated to be that way, right? You're saying that in the hunter gatherer times, you might be chased by a bear. Yes, that would elicit your fight or flight response. However, after the threat is removed, I mean, insofar as we know, then your body would return back to a normal level. But in today's day and society, like today's day and time, then we're faced with deadlines, and we're faced with all these demands that ultimately probably don't really mean anything and things like that. But they are stressors, so we still will respond to them with that fight or flight response, and we would be producing cortisol, which has a damaging effect for us to be constantly producing cortisol. So that can be a factor as well in feeling inflamed and having chronic pain, certainly. Then a lot of the other stuff that Terry and I have discussed, and a lot of other people discuss, we know that our food is not healthy for a million different reasons, right? We have mono farming, we have pesticides, and uh, all other kinds of sides out there. I'm drawing a blank right now, but we have that, we have depleted soil, we have GMOs, we have seed oils, we have like preservatives and gums and dyes and all of these things that are happening in the food system. Okay. Then we know that we have a huge amount of Americans, and probably in the Western world in general, on SSRIs and God knows what other medications. But whenever people are ingesting, so the latest statistic that I heard, or number, was from Tucker Carlson's episode on SSRIs, was that 66 million Americans were taking SSRIs, and 6 million of that was
Oh
kids,
man.
60 million of that was adults. I don't know how accurate it is. I think
Oh,
it's probably more than that. But I'm just saying, so we know that
sounds.
there's a huge amount of people that are taking SSRIs, and whenever they are processing that, going to the bathroom, then that what they don't take in or what they're excreting is in our water supply. If you're not, doing the water filter and all that stuff, I'm just saying in the general water supply, okay? Then so that's acting as a way to medicate the entire world, even though you did not agree to be medicated with that. And then you have the
Hmm.
glyphosate runoff that's in our water, and we have added fluoride and chlorine and all the other toxic things like lead, like in Flint, Michigan, like all of these things. And then who knows, like as far as the companies that are doing forever chemicals, right? We Dow and things like that, and DuPont. Then we have the changes in our movement, the more stressful lifestyle. All of these things I think are factors. And then another huge factor that I want to address is EMFs for sure. We talked about that. And I 100% believe that the EMFs could be affecting not only your inflammation, but your pain response. And that is why, and we can get into this more later, but people do sometimes have good results with grounding, whether this is the actual practice of grounding, where they go outside, or if they use a grounding mat or grounding sheets, grounding bedding, or whatever. But I definitely think that the EMF thing is a factor, and that grounding can be a benefit in that regard. And then the other thing is like all what we're talking about as far as our movement. And then a big thing is shoes. So, this is one thing that I want to talk to people about
Hmm.
is, what do your feet look like? What do your shoes look like? Okay. So a lot of people are like, oh, I don't like feet. Feet are disgusting. Oh, I'm like, okay, well, feet are very important. So maybe let's look at reframing the view of feet, because they literally are foundational to our movement, to our being able to walk and run. So let's cultivate a little bit of appreciation for the human feet. And if you're out here and you're getting weird, this is not weird. We're not being weird. Please don't be weird about it. This just uh, these are tools of the human body that are very important, but they are under attack. Okay. So feet are not made to be all bound up in shoes and have this like 3-inch thick cushion on the bottom of them. That was never what feet were, right? So a lot of people are wearing very supportive running shoes or tennis shoes, and they've got inserts and things like that, or they wear heels, or they wear really narrow shoes. And what do your feet look like? So things like that are really important, because I try my best not to wear restrictive things on my feet. I hate it. And I also don't want them to be like essentially what was it? The Chinese foot binding, it's kind of an equivalent of that.
Oh yeah.
And then a lot of times you'll see people's feet, or I did in my work, and they're very narrow, and they're very, they're like hardened in a way. Like the tissue on the top of the foot would be kind of hardened and like drawing their toes up and in together. And that's just not what your foot is supposed to look like naturally. Now, I do have some solutions and things that you can try and attempt and things like that. But I just want to say that, all to answer Terry's question, is that there's a lot of different factors. I 100% agree with you that sitting, I think it's that plus a million other different things. Oh, and one more thing that I wanted to add, and I'm sure we're just scratching the surface here, but in today's modern day and time, and Terry knows this, I subscribe to the Ray Peat kind of model of health, and like supporting your metabolic health, supporting your thyroid, and trying to reduce harmful um, hormones and things like that in the body. Well, Ray Peat was not an advocate of that women needed to have more estrogen. He thought that actually too much estrogen and too much serotonin, especially paired with a gut health that is compromised, is going to make you like what is the modern day like angry person, the person who's ready to go off on somebody at the drop of a hat, because you have too much serotonin, and sometimes in the case of female and males, maybe too much estrogen. But the imbalance of hormones that is happening in females, that can actually cause lower back pain, because whenever a female is like a woman is pregnant, and as she gets closer to being able to give birth to her child, then her body starts producing a hormone known as relaxin. And what that does is have the effects to start softening the joints, especially in the low back and the pelvis. And what that does is to help the body more easily accommodate giving birth and the baby traveling down the birth canal, which is really amazing. But things like that can have an effect on how you feel. If you have too much estrogen, or you have not enough progesterone, or whatever you want to say, then things like that can be a factor in affecting your joint integrity, and maybe causing joint, like maybe causing them to be looser than they should, or something like that. And then, of course, like you have some basics, like sometimes you have a pinched nerve. Um, a lot of people will talk about having sciatic pain. And most of the time, that's actually from a massage therapist perspective. If you know what you're doing, that's a pretty easy fix. But if you don't get your sciatic pain addressed, it's completely debilitating. And the sciatica is one of the longest nerves in the entire body. And it starts in the, like in the hip and the glute area, and runs all the way down your leg, which is why having muscle dysfunction in the glute, in a small little muscle that runs over the sciatic nerve in your glute area, can make you completely miserable. Over to you, Terry.
Wow, lots of good stuff there. I'm just scribbling away like crazy because there were loads of things that I wanted to come back on. We were going through the factors at the start there. I felt we ought to throw in a couple more. I think you mentioned activity. You know, we were adapted to be active and chasing down animals and going out hunting and gathering. So we're not particularly well adapted to sitting around all day. So a bit of exercise, you know, is obviously good for you. And find something you enjoy. It doesn't have to be running or cycling like I do. You know, go to a dance class or something that's a bit weight bearing. Well, because your body's not really like a sort of mechanical engine where parts wear out when you use it. Your body will actually get stronger if you use it, because you need a small amount of stress on things like joints and muscles in order to make them stronger. So and the other thing, of course, is obesity, which is a big problem in the West now, because we're not particularly adapted to carrying around 1.5 to 2 times the normal body weight. And that will put a lot of extra stress on your joints, for one thing. What else were you talking about? I was going to ask you a question at the end here. Feet, as a runner, it's something obviously I know quite a lot about, and you made some really good points about feet. Some people obviously find them very attractive. So I think we know of people who make money from their feet on like OnlyFans. But it's very important to look after them properly. And one thing you mentioned about shoes, and women runners will sometimes have a problem if they wear heels too often, because it shortens their Achilles tendon. And when they try and do some activity, they can snap their Achilles because it's not been stretched enough and it's been sort of compressed by wearing high heels all day long. So I think my advice, and maybe you can back me up on this, would be, you know, if you're a woman, don't wear high heels all the time, because it's very bad for your Achilles. And while we're talking about shoes, I wondered what you made of this recent movement, particularly in the running world, but it's spreading into normal shoes now, this sort of barefoot movement where you wear these very minimalist shoes. And the idea is that your feet are adapted to sort of being connected to the ground, and so wearing shoes is actually bad for your feet and bad for your gait. And I'm a bit torn about it, because although we are adapted to be connected to the ground, but we're not adapted to be walking on concrete pavements and concrete roads all the time. So I don't know. I don't know if you've got an opinion on that. Over to you.
Yeah, very good points. Thank you, Terry. And I will 100% second what you're saying. I'm not anti wearing heels sometimes, but I think try to be judicious with that because it does have a real impact. And like what Terry's saying, so not only is it going to affect your Achilles tendon, it's going to affect, if it's affecting your Achilles, that means it's affecting your calves. And it's affecting your calves, that means it's affecting your hamstrings. And if it's affecting your hamstrings, that means it's affecting your glutes and your pelvis. And that is your low back. And on we go, right? The kinetic chain, just like we're talking about. So, not that you never should wear heels, but I would try to be judicious about your wearing them. And I would also try to look into some things that you can do to care for your feet and your calves and things like that after the fact. So I definitely agree with that, Terry. I also agree with you that I am somewhat torn from the running perspective about the barefoot shoes. I'll tell you what I really like about them is that oftentimes they come with a a more flexible material and a much wider toe box, which I love. Like from a massage therapist standpoint, I think that that is very healthy. And when I'm like the shoes that I wear when I'm out walking my dogs, I wear a Keen, Keen shoe, and it has a very wide toe box, so I don't ever feel like my toes are being scrunched or anything like that, and it has very minimal support on the bottom. So there's a lot of people out there that are like, "Oh, I don't have like I have a high arch or I don't have an arch and that's why I'm having pain." But I would say that it's very possible that what we're dealing with is some uh either laxity or tightness in the calf, the Achilles, and the bottom of the foot. All things that can be worked on. And I also want to say, just in general, that there is nuance to this, right? And I'm not a physical therapist, okay? I'm a massage therapist. One of the things that I wanted to make sure that I was aware of in my practice is like what Terry was talking about or what we were talking about with doctors is that and you can get that from the 7 countries in 5 years speech. When you are a hammer, everything looks like a nail, like what Terry was talking about with chiropractors, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I had to try to be aware of that bias. So I'm not saying that as a massage therapist that I could fix every single thing or that I even fully knew every little thing that needed to be fixed, because I truly think that in some cases, and I think that there's a lot of nuance here, but that you may have areas that do need to be loosened and lengthened and stretched out in, to use that term, but basically to loosen things up. And then there are some cases when you do need to do some engaging and strengthening to provide balance. And I'm not saying that I'm an expert on that. But I think that a lot of times people will have really bound up tissue, the connective tissue on the bottom of their feet, and it causes a huge amount of pain. And they may be told by a doctor or whoever, like, oh, that's just like you have low arches or high arches or whatever that is. It's like, what does that even mean? But what they don't do is address the actual things that you put on your feet that you wear every day. And oftentimes they won't tell you not to wear heels. Sometimes they do, but they won't tell you like that they'll want to give you like a structured custom made insert that has a lot of structure for the foot, but the human body was never made to have a hard piece of plastic in the shape of your foot on the bottom of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a lot of problem with that.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not an expert, but I don't like that. So, but then also back to what Terry was saying, as far as these like zero running shoes, I I would say that overall I do think it's really good. But what we want to be aware of is if you do have arch problems, then what you may want to do some preemptive work to loosen that up and to get your feet loosened and to like spread out, have a little space between your toes, have a little bit of movement and not like really stiff tissue in your feet. So maybe you're working for that or like working on that for like 6 weeks before you transition to a zero running shoe. Or let's say that you do like gradually transition over from small amount of time from a traditional running shoe to a zero shoe and see how you feel. Because I have concerns, like what Terry's saying, on these hard surfaces, right? That if you're just running on on asphalt and you don't have something to kind of absorb, then you may feel fine and maybe that's something that you want to play around with, but I can't sit here and say like you're not going to have any kind of fallout from that you're not going to be putting any undue stress on the knees or hips or something like that. I don't know. So I think it kind of needs to be a personal thing. And then I would also say that if you wanted to transition to still be able to run, but do so in maybe a little bit more friendly to your body, that do some playing around with the zero shoes. Don't go 0 to 100 in making a huge jump in the style of shoe that you're using.
Yeah.
And also see if you can find a maybe a trail that obviously trail running has its own things, but maybe something the side of the road or like the inside of a running track, just something like that, that you may not be getting the same amount of impact on your body, on your joints, with this kind of shoe. Like sometimes we just have to get inventive and figure things out and see if we can get some relief in that way. Over to you, Terry.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that's a general principle in training for all sorts of sports and running in particular, that you don't do anything all of a sudden. You have to adapt yourself gradually. It's like if you're trying to increase your mileage, you just do it a little step at a time. And as you say, if you're going to try out a radically different type of shoe for doing any sort of sport or exercise, then you want to do it little by little to give your body a chance to adapt. So yeah, I don't really know whether it's a good idea or not. I mean, when I started running, the idea was to try and, like, they would sort of look at your gait and you say, oh, you pronate a lot, which means your foot the way your foot turns over when you run, which is natural, but sometimes they say you're overpronating, so your foot is turning over too much. And then the idea was that you give you a shoe that's very stable to stop it doing that. But that kind of, like as you were saying, that kind of doesn't make me feel terribly comfortable, because you're not helping your body to adapt to what it's supposed to do, and you're stopping it doing what it's trying to do. So I don't know, particularly if you're dealing with, like, elite athletes. I remember a story of I think it was a famous American marathon runner who won an Olympic gold medal, and they studied his gait in detail, and they found he had this kind of lopsided gait, and they said, oh, we could make you a lot more efficient if we fix that. So they tried to fix it, and he got injured, and it turned out that he had one leg slightly, I think it might have been Steve Prefontaine. It turned out he had one leg slightly longer than the other, and that's why his gait was a bit lopsided. So his body had naturally adapted. His body kind of knew what it was doing because he was an elite runner, and it had naturally adapted to compensate for this difference in leg length. So yeah, I don't know what the moral of the story is, but sometimes your body knows what it wants to do, and artificial intervention is possibly not the best thing. So that was a bit rambly. I'm sorry.
No need to apologize. It wasn't rambly, actually, because you're just saying, and I'll reiterate that, sometimes these interventions are, even though they sound really good and they sound like the latest thing and what you need to try, that may not be it. So we just need to be critical, use our critical thinking when trying to go into something and trying to be careful and cautious to avoid injury. Because a lot of people, I think the tendency is like not worry about it and, oh, if I get hurt, I get hurt. But the thing is that you're starting from, if you get injured, it's putting you behind the 8 ball. in all of your progress, and it's setting you up to have an injury somewhere else because of this what I refer to as a compensatory pattern. You're trying to compensate for the change in movement. So I think that we just need to be careful if we're trying to go to something like the Zero shoe that's nice and flat. I think it has benefits. They don't cram your feet together, which I think is how the human foot was supposed to be, is a lot more spread out than it is in today's day and time,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot more of a sturdy surface for us to operate from. But I think that we need to be aware that, yes, if you're running on asphalt and concrete and things like that, that can take a toll on your body. So we need to be careful. And then one thing I did want to add in regards to having, um, like with Steve Prefontaine potentially having one limb shorter than the other. One thing that I wanted to say is that sometimes that is connective tissue related. And that could even be from musculature, like in the hips, and maybe even a muscle known as our psoas, which is considered, could be a back muscle, but it's considered the deepest abdominal muscle that we have. And deep meaning like underneath. um that sometimes these types
Right.
of things can get really really tight, and they can actually cause a hip to be drawn up. So sometimes treating that can help kind of even things out a bit. And there's a lot of other options out there for, and we'll get into that as the series goes, as far as like treating the issues that you're dealing with. But the last thing, or I don't know about the last thing, and I apologize for being all over. This is a lot of information that we kind of want to convey, and a lot of different things that we want to talk about. But the other thing, so I think we'll maybe get into this later, but as far as describing your pain and advocating for yourself, those are the some things that I want to make sure that we cover more in depth. But the other thing that I wanted to let people know is, and this is just in the when we're dealing with musculature, that there's something known as a trigger point. Now, I don't know that this is really common knowledge because, as we discussed earlier, when you're in the traditional medical setting in that milieu, they're not educating you on any of this stuff, and they don't talk about muscles at all in most cases, in my experience. So I just wanted to do a quick little lesson on what is a trigger point and what is the havoc then that could wreak on your body. Okay, so a trigger point can occur in basically any muscle that we have in the body. And that is essentially like just a place of bound up muscle tissue, bound up muscle fiber, right? And it doesn't sound like it could really be that painful. But the thing is, with trigger points, they normally occur in specific areas in specific muscles, and they have what is known as a referral pattern. So I wanted to tie this in with my personal story of me feeling the pain in between my shoulder blade and my spine. That's where I felt that it was, but it actually was coming from a trigger point in my subscapularis, which is part of my rotator cuff. So, depending on the muscle that it's in and depending on the location of the trigger point, it will refer pain to somewhere completely different than where you actually are having the issue. Okay. So that's what I just want to let people know. So oftentimes, if you have a trigger point in a certain spot, like what I had with the subscapularis, then it has the ability to refer pain all the way up the head into the back of the neck, or the back of the neck into the head. And it can refer into the front of like your pec major and your pec minor. And it can sometimes refer down your arm. Okay. So that is one little spot, but it can cause a huge amount of pain. And it is not related, like the trigger point is in none of those places. So I just wanted to put that information out there just to let people know that if you're dealing with chronic pain, or you know somebody who has, sometimes the where they feel the pain or where you feel the pain is not where it is stemming from if it is a problem with musculature. And so that's something I think to think about. And that ties back in with being able to describe the pain that you have and understanding that you may be dealing with referral pain from another issue that or another spot that feels unrelated. Terry, do you have any questions, comments on that?
No, I think that's very good stuff. Yes, it's that's been my experience as well. That sometimes you can get pain from in other areas where the underlying problem comes from elsewhere. So yeah, no, I think you brought some good information today. So thank you for all that. We should probably think about wrapping up, should we?
Yeah, I think so. I think that we have just begun scratching the surface on this, and later, as I said, I want to get into some advocating for yourself and for being able to describe the pain that you're feeling. And the main thing that I wanted to reiterate again, this is not medical advice. That's a big one. Okay. We just want to bring an awareness so you have options and you can advocate for yourself and your loved ones, and you can try to figure out a path that works best for you. And sometimes that means being weary or being aware of what is a traditional plan in the traditional medical and pharmaceutical systems. So, not medical advice. That's a biggie. The other thing is that I know that everyone's experience does not necessarily line up with mine, but my anecdotal experience is a path that I have seen happen many, many times with many, many people that I have treated and worked with, and that is a very common experience of kind of how the treatment modality will go, and that ultimately musculature is never really discussed, or if they do recommend massage therapy or body work, they don't give you specifics, they don't teach you how to advocate for yourself, and they don't necessarily set you up with a massage therapist who's going to know or understand these nuances, or a physical therapist, or both, whatever that may be. So just that what I'm saying here is based on not only education but real life experience, and that again, a lot there's so many causes of pain. So I am not sitting here saying, and Terry's not sitting here saying that whatever pain that you have is necessarily musculature. I think that there's a lot of nuance, and there's a lot of a million different factors that are going to be contributing to figuring out what is really going on. Now, one of the reasons that massage therapy is safe in that way is because the chances of you being harmed from massage therapy for trying to work on an issue are very low. The side effects and the potential for a long-term harm
Yeah.
are very low. So that is why I feel comfortable in recommending you to try that, but I'm not saying again that it's necessarily musculature. Like sometimes there are legitimate causes of pain that are outside of musculature, which are going to be a serious illness, or sometimes it is a ruptured disc or a bulging disc, or things that we really need to be very cautious about. So that's why whenever you're seeking body work, or any kind of work, you really need to make sure that you're telling them the whole story and that you're advocating for yourself. And we'll get into this more, but I need to say that if you're going into a massage therapy or body work situation, if something feels uncomfortable and off to you, then you need to say something, and make sure that you're expressing that to your massage therapist. Now, it could be that, listen, this is a really tight spot. It's going to be uncomfortable. We need to work through it. Or it could be, no, this is actually, I think something else is going on here. So that's going to be where you're advocating for yourself. But I just wanted to make sure that I reiterate that I am not assuming that all pain is coming from musculature. That's not it at all. There's a lot of other possibilities this is just one possibility that we're talking about today, and just trying to lay some groundwork for people to be able to advocate for themselves and figure out what's going on a little more effectively. And I think that I think I've covered all of my official disclaimers that I wanted to get out of there. And again, I apologize if I was all over the map. This is a very broad subject, and I wasn't
No,
100% sure of how to really to start this, and Terry and I ultimately decided that we're just going to jump into the conversation and see where it goes. So I do hope that this has been helpful and enlightening and maybe giving you something to think about. And then before we wrap up, I just wanted to head over to Terry and see if you had anything that you wanted to add, Terry.
Yeah, I'll just make a couple of final comments quickly. My experience with massage therapy has been excellent, really, and Fiona too. We were fortunate to find a really good one in the UK, and it can be really, really beneficial and quite amazing, actually, in some of the effects it has. I thought it might be worth adding that prevention is obviously better than cure. So if you're talking about back injuries, if you get injuries like that, they can be really debilitating for a lot of your life. So it's worthwhile, for example, if you're doing a physical job where you're doing a lot of heavy lifting, do it with very good technique, and use your leg muscles, try and keep your back straight. And if you're sitting at a desk, like a lot of people are, try and make sure you've got yourself a really good setup where, they talk about right angles. I don't know if this is still current advice, Ashley, but when I was doing it, it was you're trying to keep your knees at right angles, your back and your hips at right angles, and you're trying to look straight ahead at the screen. So make sure you've got the computer screen at the right height and that you've got a nice chair. And if you're working for a reasonably sized company, they should have someone who's doing health and safety. So get them in and make sure you've got your desk arrangement set up correctly with a nice chair that you can sit comfortably all day, because that makes a really big difference. And other than that, I will just ask you, Ashley, how our viewers, listeners, and fans might get in contact with us.
Thanks for asking, Terry. I'm glad you asked. They can find us at unionoftheunknowns.com. That's our Linktree page with all the myriad ways to get in touch with us, from Discord to social media to Gmail and even our voicemail number. So we have a lot of different ways to get in touch with us. We certainly would like to hear back from you, feedback. And then, of course, if you have any questions or anything like that, we would be happy to hear from you and address those. Or if there's even in this particular pain series, if there's something you would like more information on, please feel free to share that with us. I do want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode. And, if you are, if you want to support the show, we would appreciate a like and a share, and maybe sending this to someone who may be interested in some of this alternative health thinking information, especially this one. Pain is definitely a big issue that people deal with. So we would be very thrilled if we would be able to help anybody with this information and get them maybe thinking in a little bit of a different way. So having said all that, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Terry. And I really appreciate your being here, your time, and I enjoyed it. So we'll look forward to next time. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. And goodbye.
Thank you for tuning in for another episode of Union of the Unknowns. You can find new episodes every week on all your favorite podcasting networks.